Welcome to A Time to Think. The message of today's podcast is just do it.
Go for it.
Shia LaBeouf, you know that? Green screen, just do it.
Just do it.
It's kind of been a series of just stop doing it.
Yeah,
More Bob
that's correct.
Newhart than Shia LaBeouf, really.
Stop it.
Stop
If
that.
you're not familiar with what Josh is speaking about, there's a wonderful sketch from, was it Mad TV?
It's
I think it was Mad TV,
yeah.
With Bob Newhart really being probably a very effective mental health counselor. And,
Yeah,
look it up. Look it up.
Bob Newhart, stop that. That's not necessarily what we're going for here on A Time to Think. This is a time that we have devoted to thoughtful, careful engagement, which is a little bit different than just stop that. Bob Newhart
Correct.
didn't really thoughtfully or carefully engage with his client, but he also was only paid $5. So he didn't have the financial incentive to thoughtfully or carefully engage. We are paid slightly more than $5, $6 even, to thoughtfully
maybe.
and carefully engage with issues in the culture and the church. That is the heart of why we began this podcast now at least 2 years ago, right? Maybe a little bit over 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think we're in that ballpark, Josh.
Chris, you and I, we were just driving after lunch.
That's right.
And we were
We had a good lunch.
reflecting
We had a
on
very good
why.
lunch.
Yeah, we did. Jersey Mike's is in town now.
Yeah.
Not sponsoring the podcast, but Jersey Mike, you could, if you're listening.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Jersey Mike would
You
believe.
can get it freaky fast, right?
That's Jimmy John's.
Oh, okay.
Okay, now you just lost us 2 sponsorships. So we were having unsolicited, non-podcast related conversation in the car, but really the topic that we were discussing, Chris, is why we are passionate about, why we care to do things like this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about what we talked about in the car, why we see the devotion of this time and the pushing of this podcast as helpful for the people in our church.
Yeah, well, I think, I'll provide a little bit of personal context for this. For me, as a young Christian in the early 2000s, the approach that I received to how to address questions were largely based on immediate answers. All right, now, track with me here because I don't think that immediate answers are a bad thing. But really, the approach toward dealing with questions had to do with, here's the answer with no context. Okay, there's no context to why is that a question? Why is that difficult to answer? What is the environment in which this question gets asked? And so, over the years, people can know the right answers sometimes and be able to, kind of spout the right answers off, but they don't know why it's right and they don't know why something else is wrong. And I think probably the healthiest picture that we have, you look at the Apostle Paul as he's engaging people throughout the book of Acts specifically, you'll see this. But even some of the things, I'm preaching in Titus right now this summer, and he quotes a Cretan philosopher, okay? Somebody who has examined the Cretan people and said, this is who they are. All right, and Paul is aware of it. He looks at it, he surveys it, he says, yes, this is the type of environment I'm seeing. He goes to Athens and he says, this is the type of environment I'm seeing. And as he goes to different communities, he evaluates, this is what I'm seeing. Now, how do I address that? And I think what's a little bit different about how we approach things here is that we don't simply want you, if you're listening, to know the right answers, but we want you to know why they're the right answers. We want you to be able to think well, hence a time to think. I want you to think well about these issues so that when you come across the questions inevitably, or the questions are asked of you, you're going to know why they're being asked that way. And then when you answer them, you're going to be able to give a solid response that's been couched in thought and steeped in Scripture. And we hope to benefit you in that way, in ways that perhaps when I was a young Christian, I just didn't understand.
So there's something in between the quick answer. All right, existence of evil problem.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a quick answer. Evil only exists because morality exists. Morality only exists with a personal God who sets laws. There's your answer. Get on with it.
Right.
That's one quick into the spectrum.
Yeah.
The other end is more of a subjective. Well, let's entertain all thoughts.
Right.
And there really is no conclusion.
Right.
We want to be probably not in the middle there, closer to the former than the latter, but the idea being, let's entertain the thought quite a bit into quite a depth. Let's tease apart different things.
Yep.
Let's explain this meaning over here, so that when we come to a conclusion, we've done something in the process of getting there. And Chris, I think you and I are this is the type of stuff that we talk about. I in my mind was thinking about like the book of Proverbs, where the first 9 chapters, if you read the first verse in most of the first 9 chapters, it says, my son, listen to these words.
Yeah.
My son, be attentive to these words. So sometimes in Bible studies, I'll do that as an exercise to prove the point is like, Chris, chapter 1, verse 7. Josh, chapter 2, verse 1. So-and-so, chapter 3. And we'll just go through and see my son, be attentive. There is a way in which this podcast is a little bit like our non-inspired book of Proverbs, where we're going, hey, friends, think about this. Right? Hey, friends, be aware of this.
Right.
Hey, friends, please note this. Hey, friends, think about it this way. Hey, friends, maybe an underlying thing is, hey, friends, understand the logical implications.
Yep.
I'm reading this book called How Not to Be Secular by James K. A. Smith, and one of the things that I thought was just a good reminder for me is he's distinguishing between how people think and how they feel, and the purpose was that most people, as the society has turned more and more toward unbelief, haven't arrived. The example he uses of science, he says people have not come to believe that science is the arbiter of all truth necessarily because they've gone through all the scientific data and found science to be the most compelling.
Right.
What instead is they've been baked in an oven that says, science is what makes you a rational person. Science is the right way science is the moral way. And you go, well, I feel intuitively like that's the right thing. And so now I've come to a conclusion more based on intuition. And the reason he sets that up is to say, most people don't theorize.
Right.
Right?
They don't draw out the implications
No.
or think of the consequences of ideas. Yeah.
And so I think one of the hearts behind this podcast is just an understanding that most people don't theorize.
Right.
Most people are going about daily lives, worried about anxieties of the day, the normal things in a family or a workplace.
Yeah.
And what we want to do is say the Lord has blessed us with some time to theorize, some time to workshop ideas, and then to present those and say, here's how Chris and Josh have been thinking about issues in the culture in the church. Here's what we would ask you to be attentive to. And then I think the other thing we talked about, Chris, is just that we have a heart not just for people to survive,
Right.
but to flourish.
Yeah.
To maybe you could speak a little bit about your series in Titus, that the words used for healthy doctrine.
Yep.
You know, there's a difference between food that will keep you alive and food that nourishes you. And we have a deep desire to do more than just keep our people's pulses going spiritually, right?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, we had, as you mentioned, Jersey Mike's, and something you mentioned a couple times was, fresh ingredients, good ingredients. You know, it's a higher quality product. And when we got done eating, both of us felt like that was good.
It felt great.
Yeah, it felt good. And there are other meals where it's like, well, now maybe when I'm 10 years old, I see this meal and I'm thinking, oh, it's great. This is wonderful. I'm going to have, fill in the blank with the Happy Meal or the Whopper or that kind of a thing. And after you eat it, it's like, yeah, that tasted good for a little bit. But I'm either not full right now, and so I'm craving something just like this, or I'm full and I don't feel very good about it. So you're surviving, right? You ate food, but what we aim to do, and this is just how we want to approach, our philosophy of ministry as a church generally, is we want to do what's good for you. Like, we want to care for you well, and we want to do what's best. And sometimes it looks different than what people might be used to in certain churches because hard things might be said, or we might be more personal than a lot of churches someone might attend would be, where we actually value having our elders being involved in the lives of our people. Like, that matters to us significantly, but it matters to us because we believe that's what Scripture says is the best. And so when it comes to how we want to engage these issues and how we think about these things, we want to do what's healthy. We want to do what's best. And so by making an investment of time, taking 45 minutes or an hour, and we're going to have a little longer episode today, by taking that time where you otherwise might be spending it, out, watching. And I watch TV shows. I watch, all kinds of excitement at the end of the day, wind down. Yeah, I'm just like
Chris
you.
Chris is just like us.
That's true. But, you take this little time to invest, and I'm so thankful when I hear from people, and, you might be listening right now who've talked with me about these things. Like, when I hear from people saying, I listened to this and really benefited from it, it's like, that's wonderful to hear, because our aim is to benefit.
Yeah, it's actually somewhat humbling.
Correct.
If someone said, man, that's a bang-up podcast, I would go like, okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah. But when someone says, hey, you've actually helped me think through this, I'm going, I did that?
Right.
Okay, I know that was the stated goal of it, but at the end of the day, Chris and I are just in this weird made-up cubicle talking to each other, and the Lord in His kindness will use that to help people think. That's really humbling. Yeah. And Chris, we believe that the healthy thing is going to lead to healthy worship. That thinking and worship, thinking and love are not opposite concepts.
Correct.
So part of the heart of this podcast is to say, Ecclesiastes says there's a time for everything.
Yeah.
There's a time to mourn and a time to laugh. There's a time to dance and a time to grieve. There's a time to kill and to make alive. And I think what we thought is there is a time to feel, there is a time to play, but those are the natural things we do. This is a time to think, right? Because thinking rightly is going to lead us to worship rightly. I'll give you one example from my sermon yesterday, talking about the Joseph story. Talking about how at the end of Joseph's life, his father Jacob dies and his brothers get nervous and they think, now that the patriarch is not here anymore,
the restraint is gone.
Joseph might kill us.
Yeah.
And so they basically go back, they lie again, which, come on guys, learn your lesson. They say, well, this is what our father has said, that you should not harm us. And Joseph says, don't worry. Which there's a couple key moments in Joseph's life where he's, his brothers, Judah in particular, sees the guilt of selling him into slavery. And Joseph says, don't be distressed or angry with yourself.
Yep.
Crazy. He's like, Judah, you threw me into a pit. You sold me in slavery. Don't be mad at yourself.
Don't be mad.
Why? Because the Lord sent me here to save you.
Yeah.
And something similar happens at the end of his life where Joseph says, you don't need to worry about me coming down in vengeance because what you meant for evil, and it was evil, and you purposed it for evil. You didn't have good intentions. You didn't mean well. You meant it, purposed it for evil. The Lord, God, meant it for good.
Yep.
And therefore, I'm not going to harm you, right? Because the Lord took your harm and made it for good. Now, what I sought to do is to take that and to say, look, friends, the existence of evil in our world is a hard thing, and usually people come at it, and this is the thinking. This is the thinking part, right? Usually people come at it doubtfully from the idea that if there is a good, powerful God, then evil wouldn't exist. And since evil exists, then God is either not good or not powerful because he's not doing anything about it. He's either not powerful enough to take care of it or he's not good enough to take care of it. And that's the types of ways people generally think about evil's existence in the world. What I sought to do in the sermon is to say, can we think about it a different way? If instead you asked a different question, not if God existed, evil wouldn't, but instead saying, since evil does exist, and it undeniably does, who will bring good out of it? Now, that's a different way to think. But it doesn't stop at thinking, right? Because when you ask the question, since evil does exist, who will bring good out of it? And you see at the cross, the Lord himself entering into evil to bring good out of it. Joseph was able to keep people physically alive through drought and famine. Jesus keeps us eternally alive and safe from judgment. And so this culmination of the Lord taking evil at the crucifixion and making it good at the resurrection, then we're rejoicing, Chris, right? And so we really believe that if we think deeply and we think rightly, we will rejoice fully. We will have healthy hearts, healthy minds, and that will lead us to see the Lord in all his fullness.
I mean, the scriptural support for that, Romans chapter 12, do not be conformed to the patterns of this world, right? And that's what we want to do, is we want to avoid being conformed to the patterns of this world, meaning the world around us. We don't want to be fit into a mold and thinking according to the world's thought patterns. Instead, we want to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. And so we believe, based on Scripture, that if we set ourselves under the authority of the Word of God, and that we're serious in how we take it, and we think through it, and we meditate on it, and we deal with issues that way by saying, all right, pattern of this world, I acknowledge that is what the pattern of this world is. You know what I'm going to do? I want to no longer think that way, but I want to be transformed. How do I get transformed? It's by my mind being renewed. And then Paul says, so that you may be able to discern what is the good, acceptable, perfect will of God. And so really our desire here is that as you learn to think Christianly and think God's thoughts after him, as the old Reformation saying is, as you begin to think this way, your life will be changed. And so it's a slow burn. It's a slow process, that process of change typically. But we want to help you in that process. And, Josh, you've chosen this book, Digital Liturgies, to talk through, because this is a very present, a present, I don't want to say threat, but it's a present issue that we deal with when we think about how the world around us is so heavily invested in technology, and how technology plays out in our lives in ways that we don't even think about sometimes, to the point where it's not a strange thing anymore for somebody to look down at a 6.4-inch screen with all the world around them staring at it, tapping on it, and thinking that's something perfectly normal, right? 50 years ago, somebody's doing that, you think that they're insane. But there's something about that screen, there's something about that little device that we hold in our hands that has fundamentally changed how we relate to other people, how we relate to the world around us. And that's been your heart in wanting to bring this up. And that's our heart in wanting to talk about these issues together because it has changed us. And so,
so Digital Liturgies is an example of something that has changed how we think without us thinking about it.
Correct.
It's like this weird, if we had believed in intersectionality here on the podcast, it would be this weird intersectional, beautiful, like, it changes how we think, and we're not thinking about it. We should think about it, right? And that's really how the thrust of the book. We've talked about how shame distorts how we think on the last podcast, or 2 podcasts ago. We talked about how multiple times how our pursuit of man's glory leads us to not see the truth in the same way that the Jews' pursuit of the glory of man led them to not see the glory of Christ. We've seen how subjectivism changed it, and then in all of this, how the internet in particular as an environment, as a habitat, is part of changing how we think. So the last 2 chapters, I think I've mentioned a couple times that all 5 liturgies are not going to hit everyone, but usually there'll be about 2 that hit you.
Sure.
Well, here's my 2.
Here's your 2. All right.
4 and 5.
All right.
The first 3 I just engaged in because we had to. These are the ones that I've really thought most about since reading the book personally. And we're just going to do one long podcast here because I think the 2 tie together. So you're free to consume this one in chunks.
Yeah, do your dishes, folks. Run on your treadmill.
And
do
if
whatever you want to do.
the podcast is still going, go do Chris's dishes.
Yeah.
And just finish the podcast.
Please do that. Help my wife out. Help her out.
So chapter 7 is called Naked in the Dark, and it's the digital liturgy of consumption. He starts off with this quote from Lord of the Rings, so if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, this might get you. I'll just read the quote because it's good. "Do you remember that bit of rabbit, Mr. Frodo," he said, "and our place under the warm bank in Captain Faramir's country, the day I saw an Oliphant?" "No, I am afraid not, Sam," said Frodo. "At least I know that such things happened, but I cannot see them. No taste of food, no feel of water, no sound of wind, no memory of tree or grass or flower, no image of moon or star are left to me. I am naked in the dark, Sam, and there is no veil between me and the wheel of fire. I begin to see it even with my waking eyes, and all else fades." So the chapter is called Naked in the Dark because it's giving this experience that Frodo is describing. It says, I can't see what you're telling me I used to see. I've been so consumed by the image of, I believe, the ring. I've only seen the movies once.
Oh,
Sauron?
Josh,
okay.
Good grief.
I am a Christian, by the way.
Joshua.
So the analogy is, James says, in a manner resembling demonic possession, the ring bearer eventually loses his sense of self as his mind itself becomes ring-like, deadened to the things he once loved and consumed instead with the ring. Crawling slowly up the volcanic Mount Doom, Frodo confesses to Sam that he knows he has been taken captive by the ring's power. He cannot remember their days outside the hellish land of Mordor. He cannot choose to imagine a happier day. The ring is possessing him, and all else feels lost.
And Josh, just to correct you for a second, it's pronounced Mordor. Just to be clear.
Is that all?
For all of my friends who are listening right now and are pushing back, Josh, Mordor is, you're so out of the loop when it comes to the accent here. Middle-earthian, it's Mordor.
It's a good thing that grace is a Christian concept.
It's a good thing that I'm here to correct you.
Yes, it is. So he starts off the chapter with this analogy because eventually he's gonna do 2 things that I think are very interesting. He's gonna start by highlighting the prevalence of internet pornography.
Sure.
So that he can say that the entire internet is pornography shaped. I think this is the most provocative of the chapters. But what I like that he does is he says, hey, we can't talk about the internet without saying that one of its chief exports is pornography.
Right.
I think he quotes one statistic from a website that 3 of the top 20 most visited sites globally are pornographic.
That's it?
It's still 3 of 20.
Okay.
And I don't know if this is the top 3, but
sure.
It's not sports sites,
Yeah.
So he brings that out, but he doesn't want to stop.
It's not monergism.com or Blue Little
Here?
Bible or
or
ligonier.org. Yeah.
So he wants to say that, look, we can't talk about the internet and how it shapes us without talking about pornography because it really is one of the hallmark distinctions in temptation and gripping people in sin from 20 years ago, right? And But at the same time, what he wants to do is go further than that and say the reason pornography is enticing on the internet is because the rest of the internet is pornography shaped,
Yeah.
and it shapes us into the type of person that falls into that temptation. So he uses.
So what does it mean, Josh, for it to be pornography shaped?
Okay, so he uses 3 different words to talk about the idea of consumption.
Okay.
The words are novelty, consumption, and isolation. And so he says if you look at pornography, there are aspects to it like novelty. You're
Sure.
constantly going back for something new.
Yep.
Consumption. You have to objectify another and only be concerned with getting for yourself. So
yourself,
that's consumption. And isolation. It's by nature something you do in private, away from
Right.
other people.
Yep.
Well, the advent of particularly a smartphone, laptop, computer, kind of, but particularly a smartphone,
Yep.
it breeds a desire for novelty, consumption,
Right.
and isolation. Reflect on that as I'm kind of just reading through some of the quotes that, or maybe you want me to give a little bit more before I ask you to reflect on a controversial topic.
Give me a little more. Give me a little more.
He says a large part of online pornography's power over contemporary culture comes from the devices that deliver it. That is to say, the habits, the feelings, and the ideas that the web makes more plausible are the same habits, feelings, and ideas at work in the person who is hooked on pornography. To put it differently, the internet is pornography shaped.
Okay. So let me draw from many years ago, a philosophy class, and when I was in my undergraduate studies at the illustrious University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point.
Go Pointers.
Go Pointers, indeed. There's a philosophy class that I had in which we talked about Plato, not the wonderful mushable, mashable toy, but Plato, the philosopher. And I thought Plato was really helpful in a lot of ways because, he provided, I think, some pretty sober reflections on human experience. And one of the most helpful things that I remember taking from that was he came up with this thing as a hypothetical, of course, called the Ring of Gyges. And so we're going to tie in kind of the ring here a little bit with, Lord of the Rings. And the Ring of Gyges was his thought experiment about what would a human being do if they could operate in secret. If they could operate free from the sight of other people, all right, the ring made you invisible. And you could go about and you do what you wanted, and there would be no accountability, no type of question of your behavior. You could just do, right?
Okay.
Now, the ring in
Sounds
Lord of the
terrifying.
Rings, yeah, it is terrifying. The ring in the Lord of the Rings does make you invisible, and it consumes you with the power that's built into this ring. And
That's pronounced ring, not ring or something?
no, that's
Something
correct.
like
It's
that?
just ring. Learn your Middle Earth, Josh. So, the ring provides you with this incredible power. And, Sauron poured all of his evil into the ring when it was forged in the fires of Mount Doom. And so, the Ring of Gyges functions, and I'm sure Tolkien was well familiar with this, a really bright man. But, when we talked about this in philosophy class 20 plus years ago now, the thought was, well, how does a human being operate this way? Now, in secular thought, the most common idea is that somebody is either a blank slate, right, or tabula rasa, that's the Latin phrase for it, or people are inherently good because the idea of good is based on a subjective moral standard that's, hinged on humanity, not on something outside of us. And so where I think Plato becomes somewhat Christian or biblical in his thought, I mean, some people over the years even said that he was probably exposed to the Old Testament, is that he comes to the conclusion that we would not do good things, that we would not do good things if we're given the opportunity to do what we would without accountability, without being seen. And so as we think about how pornography and, for our generation, Josh, millennials and younger, we grew up with this, right? I mean, we grew up with the accessibility of the internet right there at all times. And, it's marketed. I mean, just preached on Titus 2 yesterday, and the words to both older men and younger men are be self-controlled. And there's something about just the male impulse, which is, I like it, I want it, I have to have it.
Yeah.
And you go after it, right? And so what the internet does is it seizes upon that, and how the smartphone in particular operates is, what's unique about a ring is it's small, it fits in your pocket, and you can put it on, and it's inobtrusive, and you just, you're unobtrusive, you go and you just do, right? Well, the smartphone operates similarly for us now, in as much as it's small, unobtrusive. Take it into a bathroom, take it into the basement, take it away from people, take it in your car, take it to the woods, take it wherever you want to. But it provides you with what was the I again?
Isolation.
Isolation. And so it provides you the opportunity to be isolated. And, when you're 15 years old, late 90s, you have a computer in the living room. Well, you can't take that with you, right? And so you're always looking over your shoulder, like, well, somebody going to walk in, my parents going to walk in, that kind of a thing. Well, now I can move myself wherever, and it's really become for us the ring of Gyges. In principle, it functions the same way. No accountability, do what you want on it. There are very few exceptions to the no accountability thing. There may be websites that are being monitored. I'm not sure how that operates, but man, at the end of the day, it's a free-for-all.
Yeah,
Consume what you want.
And so what James wants to do is, I've read a lot of discussions of pornography and temptation, both back in the day experiencing temptation and then also trying to pastor others through it. And so what I find unique about James's discussion is that he wants to say pornography is the extreme example of something that is shot through the rest of the internet.
Right.
And so if you find yourself listening and you're struggling with temptation of pornography, okay, there's some things you need to see about the internet that are going to be helpful in shaking it off. If you find yourself listening, you say that's never been a temptation or it's not anymore. Well, there's also still habitual habitat things in the internet that are like it and that will make you predisposed to it. And so you mentioned the idea of self-control. Is there anything about the internet that teaches self-control? Is like TikTok going, you've watched one video, should you really watch
now
one
you're done
more?
for the day, right?
I mean, nothing about the internet prompts self-control. So to take it out of the sexual example, I know intuitively if I'm flicking through Twitter for more than 20 minutes, I'm more prone to go binge Lay's potato chips.
Right.
I get into this psychological malaise of like, I just a little bit more, and then I walk in and a little bit more snack, and I don't want to be interrupted.
Where'd the time go?
And so you can feel that intuitively, that the connection between consumption online and just continuous a little bit more leads to unhealthy eating, or the same type of thought patterns that you have at 9:30 p.m. that maybe you're able to have self-control at 10 a.m., but you do great all day until after dinner, and then you just ruin it. And these types of things show us that it's not just the extreme example, but there are these themes and threads that are shot through what the internet trains us to be, that end ultimately in something like internet pornography. And
so here's an example, Josh. I want to interject here. I'm old enough to remember when Facebook first came out, and I think it was like 2000.
How old are you?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it was 2007 that I got Facebook for the first time, and so I get an account, and I remember the early days of Facebook. I had a laptop computer, of course, at the time because smartphones weren't out in 2007. And so I had a laptop computer, and you log in, sign into Facebook, and you would go down your news feed. And here's what would happen. You saw what was new, and then you got to the place that you left off last time, and you said, okay, I've seen what's new, and it's done.
Yeah.
Right? So you've caught up effectively. So it's kind of like reading the newspaper. It's like, okay, I'm going to read the new news stories for the day, and now I'm done.
Yeah,
all
theoretically, if you had kind of yesterday's newspaper and today's newspaper tied together.
Yes.
And you're like, oh, I got to the point of yesterday's newspaper. I've already read that.
Which is why, it's called the news feed. Well, then something happened, and I don't pretend to know the technology behind this, but something called infinite scroll was invented. And infinite scroll was invented, which is an algorithmic principle that basically states that the consumption feeds of social media are no longer driven by catching people up. It's driven by what we think you should consume, right? Now, hey, advertising's fine. Advertise. I'm a capitalist. As a church, we'll advertise on Facebook at times, and that's fine. That's good. But what's happening here is that the social media companies, who are not charging you for their products, of course, have come up with a way in which to keep you so invested in it that you won't leave. That you think, okay, this is all new to me. It all seems new or novel, right? That's the N in those three letters. It's novel, and so I'm going to consume novel things in an isolated way. I can go to my room, I can go to my bathroom, and like you said, we're going to kind of take out the illicit nature of pornography and talk about the pornogrified internet and say the same pattern exists for, as I scroll through my newsfeed, I'm looking for the novel to consume in an isolated way. And here's the thing that's kind of dastardly about this, is that the isolation is baked into the algorithm because it's tailored specifically to you. They know you, right? They know what you desire. They know what you like. Your like how long you linger when you're scrolling is tracked by a company, and so they'll know what you're staring at more than less. And so they say, we want to isolate you, and we want to provide you with the opportunity to consume novel things at all times. And if you just consider, I've been on Facebook for a good 5 years now, I think. Maybe more than that. Wow, goodness. And it's been wonderful. But, it really kind of took a moment for me to say, I need to stop caring about what other people think that I don't know and really care about the people that I do know. Mm-hmm. And that was, for me, my conviction. Now, I'm not saying Facebook is an evil thing altogether. A lot of people I know use it. But
the Apostle Paul condemns the pursuit of newness for newness' sake, right?
Sure.
Is that in the book of Acts? Is it you are just gathering together in pursuit of what's new? Is that the Areopagus?
Yes, yeah, the Areopagus, and they just liked accumulating new ideas, and they would sit and talk about them.
And so there is an ancient example of condemning this practice. Is you just like to sit around looking at what's new. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, he's saying you've got you're willing to erect a new statue to a new God if you hear about a new thing, but you have a statue to an unknown God, and what you see as unknown, I proclaim to you as known, right?
Yep.
So Paul is not chiefly wanting them to set up a new God statue.
Right.
He wants them to see through all of this new garbage that they're wasting their time with to what's true.
Right.
And so we have to be aware that even in the scriptures is an ancient example of condemning the sole pursuit of novelty. And James brings up novelty. He says, we keep scrolling or we keep refreshing our feeds for no other reason than finding new content that purposeless attention might reveal. There's a couple times where James says something like, for no other reason. And he says, hey, I'm in the room with my kids and I'm on my phone, not for any reason like work or something pressing, but I find myself there just because I am. And the same thing is true here. We're searching for new, not because there is a game score to check, not because we know someone went on vacation and we'd like to see how it was, but just because there might be something new. And he calls it purposeless. That's a very different thing than, oh yeah, I remember that so-and-so threw a charity event and I want to go see what it was. And so he's saying, we keep scrolling, we keep refreshing just for maybe the chance to find something new. He says there's a vital connection between that's the purposeless, aimless immersion in content and the spiritual mood. Here's where we got to grasp his idea. Mm-hmm. There's a vital connection between aimless immersion in content and the mood that primes a heart to seek out lust. He says emotionally numbed by endless scrolling. I mean, don't you feel that?
Sure.
And I keep saying 20 minutes because I just intuitively feel like 10 or 15 minutes of being on social media and I'm actually there for a reason.
Sure.
But after about that, I'm just there and it's hard to leave.
Right.
So he says we're emotionally numbed. Like we're just there. We're just kind of still eating the ice cream because it's there, not because we're still hungry and it's not even that satisfying anymore, but it's still here.
It's still there, yep.
Emotionally numbed by endless scrolling, the human heart tends to become inclined toward that which simply offers a dash of color to an otherwise drab listlessness. Mindless search for more stuff pushes us toward the temporary thrill and pseudo-connection of online pornography. He quotes one philosopher says, what is to be learned from the testimonies of pornography's users is the important fact that contrary to prevailing cultural assumptions, the lust of the eyes is not a hot, but rather a cold vice. It arises from the roaming unrest of the spirit rooted in spiritual apathy. So James is saying something very fascinating here. It's not just that I have these hot passions that I can't quell. It's that actually in the moment of numbness and apathy,
I want to feel something.
I'll just do anything.
Right.
He then uses a biblical example, like King David wandering the roof of his palace during the season when the king should have been off to war. Our modern encounters with online pornography can be a reflection of a much larger immersion in purposelessness.
Yeah.
A problem that usually begins not with explicit images, but with meaningless scrolls. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's well said. It's well said. I can't, I don't think I can add anything to it. I think it's probably more important than anything. I mean, because, early on, I want to say, yes, there was a helpful, a helpful emphasis early on in my years in college and campus ministry in the early 2000s, where the issue of lust was more manageable because I think it focused more on those kind of hot feelings, right? Because
Yep.
at that point, we hadn't been so numbed out by the idea of scrolling. Like, if you tell somebody to scroll, it means like, okay, so I'm going to look down a web page, right? Like, so,
Yeah.
you're going to scroll down to the bottom of this article or this news story, whatever, like, that's what I'm going to do. Because in 2003, 2004, you're not dealing with, at this point, Facebook wasn't even really a
Right.
thing at all.
Yeah.
And so the idea of hot feelings would probably more a present thing. And you think of like, going to a strip club.
It was
It's like,
more how to quell your passions if they
Exactly.
arise than how to avoid a spiritual apathy that would lead you
Exactly,
towards.
exactly. And so if we take a step back and think, why is it that we're at the place that we are right now as people? Okay, I'm just going to say as people generally, and we're going to kind of decentralize it from the explicit discussion of pornography
Okay.
to talk about, the shape, right, that you're talking about,
Yeah.
the internet, the shape that it's in right now, is that it's taught all of us that, I don't want to say vice necessarily, because there are some things that are allowable, right? If you go on Pinterest and you're looking for hair design, right? There's nothing wrong with looking up for a hairstyle, right? There's nothing wrong
Unless
with
you're
that.
me. It's pretty aimless and purposeless.
Bald is beautiful, Josh. Bald is
you,
beautiful.
thank you.
But you're looking through these things, and it's benign pursuit.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's a benign pursuit. But what is it that in that movie, The Social Dilemma, or documentary? We won't call it a movie; it's a documentary. Social Dilemma that came out 5 years ago, or whatever. What is it about that each of these executives who left these environs of social media companies say it's dangerous, 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 on the same level that I would say pornography is dangerous, 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 because it becomes consuming of your affections. And they're both aimed at the same thing. They're both aimed at getting attention and keeping attention. And the attention is not gained because you're going to people who are, you're reaching the heights of their, like, I just need to find hairstyles. I'm looking for hairstyles. Or, I need to find the best possible solution to my car care questions, right? I'm bored. I'm
Yeah.
bored. And the reason why we're bored at this point in our culture is because everything is accessible to us. Like, really right now, Josh, you and I could just do whatever. We could go on the internet, we could find whatever, buy whatever, Amazon whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so for us, we live as a bored people. We think that we're entertained, and we are entertained, but the entertainment only exists because we're perpetually bored. We don't actually have anything to do. We're less productive economically. You think, what is the work culture today? And man, I find myself as like a crotchety old man, but I walk into businesses, a lot of times restaurants who are paying 16, 18 bucks an hour now, and all I find are 19-year-olds who are staring at their phone, and I come in the door, they put it back in their pocket temporarily and like, hey, welcome to Subway. And they stare at me, right? And then they can't wait
Not
for
Jersey
me.
Mike's, though. They were busy today.
Oh, they were hopping.
They didn't have time
They
for
were
their
hopping.
phones.
Yeah, the sandwich artists are not always
Trying
hopping
to
like
get
Jersey
Trying
Mike's.
to get that advertisement
Oh,
dollars
yeah.
back here.
But, and then what happens as soon as I pay for my order, the kid pulls it out of his pocket and goes back on it. And he doesn't realize that there is more fulfillment to be found in actually doing something productive, constructive, building a relationship with his coworkers, talking with people. Like, I understand you can be bored working fast food. I get it. Like, I understand that. But we live in a bored culture.
Yeah.
Strangely enough,
But pre iPhone, if you're bored working at a fast food restaurant, you got to do stupid stuff like, all right, what if we did a triple Big Mac?
Right, exactly.
You have to use actually engaging creativity.
Right, right.
And so I'm glad you pulled it back just from the explicit, Chris, because that's the point of his chapter, is to say there is this extreme example in pornography, but what we need to maybe catch is the on-ramp up to it. And so if we find ourselves, and here's maybe a check for all of us. The moment the Spirit reminds us that we're being aimless, let's pause
Sure.
and stop.
Yep.
Even if it's just for 5 minutes. Now, as I'm pondering this, I'm going like, okay, is it always bad to be aimless? Like, I know one couple in the church that their favorite type of vacation is to go and make no plans and wander around a new city. Well, that could be a healthy, because you're like,
Sounds like homelessness, Josh.
let me just experience whatever, right? If we want
Right.
to go to the coffee shop, we can. If we want to, that could be a healthy aimlessness. Not every day has to be planned, jot, and
Right.
tittle.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
But when it comes to the internet, the type of aimlessness and purposelessness that just has us there because we're there to scroll for something new. When we hit that moment, and usually we can have a little moment of conviction there where we're like,
Right.
I should be off of this.
Yep.
We should really listen to that moment, because what likely happened is we went there for something good that's new. For me, it's going
Yes.
to be to check a new update on the Tennessee baseball team because they just made the
Or your
College
new
World
fantasy
Series.
football team.
Or my new fantasy
Josh has
football
joined our
team.
fantasy league in Stevens Point, and it is phenomenal.
For others, it might be car information, or it
Right.
might even be something on Instagram. And we get there and we get what we looked for, and then we stay for some reason. And we should
Right.
we should try to find that check. Am I
Yeah.
here just because I'm here for something new? Because if we don't check ourselves there,
We'll
then
wreck ourselves there.
we will start to get into this purposeless, aimless, drab numbness, and that's what leads to some of these negative emotional affects.
Yeah.
That will lead to temptation, whether it's pornography temptation or temptation towards despair or
Right.
anger. Or I know the longer I'm on social media, the more apt I am to be irritable.
Yeah, well, maybe here's an analogy that's helpful, right? Because the internet's free, and we don't think about the cost of it, right? We just don't think about
Yeah.
it. We get upset when the cost that Spectrum charges us goes up. But think about what your involvement, your investment, and man, like, guilty of this as anyone. So I'm not speaking from a place of having learned the secret to this. But maybe if we go on the internet and we think in terms of how we would go to a store. And we go to a store, and it's like, all right, I'm going to Walmart. You go to Walmart with an idea of what you need to get, okay? And you're at Walmart, and then maybe something catches your eye, like, okay, I could use that too.
Yeah.
But now imagine the individual who goes
Or
into
that's
Walmart.
just fun.
Right. But you go into Walmart, and you decide, I'm going to walk up and down every aisle, and anything that catches my eye, I'm putting in my cart.
Yeah.
And then you get to the register, and you pay for it, and you put it on a credit card, and it's like, okay, well, I don't need to think about the cost right now. And then you get the credit card bill in your email or your mail. You take a look at the credit card bill, and you're like, oh, where did that come from?
Mm-hmm.
What were the consequences of that outing, that trip to Walmart? And you think, as human beings who are technologified, we'll say technologified. I'm just making the word up. Technologified.
You're smarter than all of us, so we just believe you if you say it.
Well, believe me now. So we're technologified, and every time that we will go on, and there are legitimate reasons to go to Wally World, right? But then there's also the illegitimate trip.
Some people would argue that there aren't.
Well, I'm a peon, and I go to Walmart at times, and so you go and you think like, all right, if I can make a reasonable case for why I'm going, and come home and present it to my family and say, hey, I feel good about this purchase. That's a good reason to go.
Yeah.
But imagine the trip where you take and you buy these things, you come home, you hide them from everybody because you're embarrassed, right? You're embarrassed about what happened at Walmart. You're embarrassed you bought all these things that looked good at the time, felt good at the time, and you're going to find a way to use it, but somehow, the cost is there. And then, your wife sees a credit card, like, what happened here? And just like as human beings, what is the cost of us making aimless trips into the internet where we just get lost in the shuffle of the things that are marketed to us and our affections? We don't need to spend money on the internet to have it cost us something.
Yeah, well, particularly so there's a fantastic book if you're looking for extra literature, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. He shows particularly in adolescence, the cost is sleep. That most people in younger Gen Z and Gen Alpha are terribly underslept. Like they're losing 2-3 hours a night. And when you lose sleep, you lose metabolism. You're more likely to get sick. Your emotional affects are all down. So one of the immediate costs is sleep. A more intangible cost is relational connectedness.
Right.
I think one of the things that James says is that for connectivity, we have traded connection. So to stay connected all the time, we have traded actually being connected to any one single person.
Yeah.
So there's a couple different costs there. I would just, if any of us just reflects on that, staying up too late, waking up too late, that's kind of pretty common in modern culture because we can keep the TV on or the phone on. It doesn't feel good. I mean, we lose something there in our emotional affect for the rest of the day. So there are real costs there. One of the costs we're going to talk about in the next podcast, in the next section of this podcast, is just a loss of joy. So the 5th chapter is about how meaningless aimlessness leads to a lack of joy. And I want to have joy. I think you want to have joy. I think most people want to be
You know,
happy.
else wants to have Stan Kelderman. See, I'm going to shout out to you right now because Stan is always saying, you know, if the gospel is true, we should be joyful.
All right,
we should be the most joyful people in the entire world.
Remind me of that Stan the Man quote, because that's what we're getting
Yeah.
in the second half of this. I will just read a couple helpful things from the consumption and isolation pieces, because those three words that James used to say the internet is pornography shaped is novelty, newness, consumption, and isolation. For consumption, this was something to think about, Chris. He says, consumption is arguably the core ethos of the online age. The singular word content is now used to describe any and everything that is published on the internet, a word that suggests not something definite that demands a particular response, like an essay to read or a photograph to be admired, but a morass of generic attention-soaking material. Anything can be content because anything can be consumed. So just the word content is like, I've had some content today. It's like, what have you eaten?
What does
today?
that mean?
I've eaten some content,
things.
you know, like some things, some stuff. It just, I love this morass of generic attention-soaking material. So even the word we use there, I think there's an interesting play on words that the more we seek content, the less content we are.
Woo!
So there's something there. You can think about that. I won't go into more just because for the sake of time. Isolation, here's a helpful one. He just talks about individualism. So one of the key things about social media that you said earlier is it's tailored to me. So my Twitter feed and my wife's Instagram feed are going to be different things, which means
Right.
we're going to be in the same room doing different things.
Yeah.
If we share something, generally it's going to be something the other person doesn't care about from a
Yeah.
different tailored feed. And there's another decent quote, I think. With great individualism, however, has come a great palpable sense of aloneness. Though we are more entertained and curated than ever before, many modern people report stunning levels of loneliness and inability to meaningfully relate to others. Connectivity has undermined connection. So that's that quote from earlier.
So
but
with
better.
great individualism comes great aloneness. How far we've fallen from with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah. And so maybe the product of all this is something I think is valuable for us to think about in relationship to other people and the church. Contemporary pornography, or the pornographic-shaped internet, according to James, puts the individual user at the center of the universe. The individual is at the center of the universe. We have a godlike freedom to pursue any fantasy we wish. New fantasy, consumption fantasy, isolated fantasy. We're like God's choosing whatever we want. That's what the internet makes us think. Like, I choose what I want. Which means the normal ribbits. Woo, that's what you get you when you combine rhythms.
You got a
and
frog in your
habits.
throat,
Yeah.
Josh?
The normal rhythms and habits of online life would be to find something to suit you, use it until it becomes boring, and then move on to something else. Now, I'm going to read that sentence again, and I want you to think about how tempting it is to view your friends and the Church of Jesus Christ this way.
Uh-oh.
The normal rhythms and habits of online life, find something that suits you, that you like, that's helpful to you. Use it until it becomes boring. Stay until you don't like it, and then move on to something else. So that's an example of how the internet, what's good for me, what do I like now, when do I get bored, then I move on. It actually changes how I relate to actual people, to the church, maybe even to jobs.
Right.
I just become a person does it suit me?
I'm tired of it, yeah.
I'm the center of the universe. And so we need to, if we're regularly engaging in the internet, we need to be on guard against that temptation to only view people around us as useful until they're boring, and then we move on.
Josh, do you think this has anything to do with, when you think about the transgender movement, why the prevalence of internet relationship has seen it increase? You know, because you would think, based on the types of, I guess, numbers, statistics, things get bandied about today when you talk to an individual who's promoting the transgender movement. You would think that there's been this repressed culture of 10% of the population for the past thousands of years where people have said, I wish I could be this, but now they're just giving the voice to be these things. I think we'd have a much different take on it now, especially as we see how things have developed. We think, all right, well, if the internet is the place where you're at the center and people need to effectively, like, you're able to consume these things for yourself, and you gather things around yourself. When you translate that into relationship outside of the internet, right? We think about children now who are being raised where their primary relationships, and I think that's where we want to kind of like see the shift that's occurring now in our world. Their primary relationships are largely centered on digital media and consumption. We think, okay, well, if I can be whatever I want to be there, then it must be the case that off the internet, I should be able to do the same thing. And so, you think about the plague that the transgender movement has been on our culture. A lot of it's driven by the same, like, it's the natural progression of what you're talking about, the natural progression of saying, I am at the center. And I've heard Tucker Carlson talk really helpfully about this particular issue of seeing transgenderism is the anti-Christian religion. And, it's the way he put it was like, instead of seeing God defines who I am as a man or a woman, and I take my cues from outside of me, the transgender religion says that I am at the center and everybody else needs to bow down to what I want. And so, I think we're seeing the transgender movement. We see the outward expression of the private consumption that happens on the internet, where now we're seeing it move into social circles, where we're now demanding that the same types of latitude that we expect from our internet interactions will be afforded to us by real people in the real world.
Yeah, I think for sure the ability to, I think self-determination is the original and abiding sin. If you look at Adam and Eve in the garden, choosing to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and say, well, what is the knowledge of good and evil? Is it just knowing right and wrong? Well, God had already told them what was right and wrong. It's right to be fruitful and multiply and to fill the earth and subdue it and to eat of any tree in the garden. What's wrong is don't eat of that one. So they kind of already had a knowledge of right and wrong. So it doesn't seem that eating of the tree is just bare factual moral knowledge as much as you will get to determine what is right and wrong. Because it really is in Eve determining that the fruit looks good. Don't eat of the tree, but then Eve determined that looks good. Adam determined to do nothing.
Right.
And now we have self-determination as the original sin. And so if the internet, as a general principle, gives us the great and unceasing power to determine what we see, when we see it, we can determine to see something that someone else in the room is not seeing. We can watch what we want, when we want it. We can have this until it's useful for ourselves. We're at the center of the universe. Yeah, the logical outflow of that is who can stop me from doing what I think is right.
Even biology is malleable now in our hands, right?
So there's certainly other things like, let's say hypothetically you could have the smartphone in the 1800s before modern surgical technology.
Right.
Maybe you don't have the transgender movement because you need some other pieces there in play. But it's certainly it's the on-ramp is helpful there.
It paves the way. It's the road. Yeah.
And with that extreme example, we want to pull back and say, how does that affect the average person? Man, it's really tempting to view God as useful to me now.
Yeah.
And to view the church as something that is or is not useful. And to therefore engage with God or engage with the church or engage with, I'm trying to think if there's any other categories, only to the degree that I find them to be useful or appealing now.
Or pleasurable, right?
Yeah, the scriptural commands to engage, to not neglect meeting together, to engage with the Lord through his word, to worship him fully and truly, those are not primarily pragmatic or usefulness concerns. And they're not primarily based on my current understanding of whether or not they're helping me.
They're ought tos, right?
They are,
ought to do it.
You do this. And so we should be wary of, in our Christian service, in our worship, in our connection to other people, and in connection to the church, are we subtly viewing people kind of like the internet has shaped us to view them, which is helpful or appealing now, but maybe not helpful or appealing later.
Yeah.
So that's one way we can take the extreme example, pull back. Want to bridge the gap here between chapter 4 and chapter 5 with a quote from Johnny Pipes, from John Piper.
Ooh.
And this is a quote that he said helped him think through the issues of temptation. And what I found was fascinating, Chris, is I read this quote and then I flipped one page to the next chapter, and it felt like there was this majestic tie between the two chapters. So Piper says, do you know why there are no windows on adult bookstores? Or do you know why there are no windows on certain kinds of nightclubs in the city? I suppose your answer would be, well, because they don't want people looking in and getting a free sight. That is not the only reason. You know why? Because they don't want people looking out at the sky. Do you know why? The sky is the enemy of lust. I ask you to think back on your struggles. The sky is a great power against lust. The sky is pure, lovely, wholesome, powerful. These pure, lovely, wholesome, powerful, large-hearted things cannot abide the soul of a sexual fantasy at the same time. Piper says, I remember as I struggled with these things in my teenage years and in my college years, I knew how I could fight most effectively in those days. But now I've developed other strategies that prove very effective. And one way of fighting was simply to get out of the dark places. Get out of the lonely rooms. Get out of the boxed-in places. Get out of the places where it's only small. Me and my mind and my imagination and what I can do with it. And get to where I am just surrounded by color and beauty and bigness and loveliness. There is something about bigness, something about beauty that helps battle against the puny, small, cruddy use of the mind to fantasize about sexual things.
That's very Piper-esque,
Yeah.
Josh. Very Piper-esque.
What does he say in a nutshell? He says, get out of the dark places. Get out of that aimless malaise of the internet.
Yeah.
And go to the big and the beautiful and the lovely. He gives the sky as an example,
Yeah.
but nature is an enormous example of this. Being in rich communities is an example of this. Being around like babies and toddlers and just their kind of silly joy is an example
yes.
of this. Doing good exercise and physical labor is an example. But get around something big and something beautiful and see how that lessens the temptation for what he calls the puny, small, cruddy use of the mind.
Puny, small, and cruddy. There we go.
So here's the tie. You flip page from 148 to 149, and the 5th chapter is called Death by Minutia. Meaninglessness is the digital liturgy of number 5. It starts with a quote from Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell, famous atheist, one of the atheists that took it to the logical conclusion. Some atheists, like Richard Dawkins, want their cake and they eat it too. Like Dan Barker, who came up here years ago, he wanted to assume there was no meaning to life except for he loved his grandkids.
Right.
You know, and it's like, well, yeah, that doesn't make any sense, man. Why do you love your grandkids? Because you were made in the image of a God who loves his children, yada, yada, yada. But some atheists want, like Richard Dawkins has straight out said, I think it's better for people not to believe in Christianity, but I'd like to live in a Christian country.
Right, right.
I don't want to live in a Muslim country. I don't want to live in a secularized West. I like the Christian stuff. Just,
Just don't bother me with the whole God business. That's the.
But Bertrand Russell was a little bit more intellectually honest.
Sure.
He kind of was drab at times because he took his ideas to a logical conclusion. He says, at the end of his life, there is darkness without, and when I die, there will be darkness within. There is no splendor, no vastness anywhere, only triviality for a moment and then nothing. So compare that to Piper's quote.
Yeah.
Piper says, to avoid temptation, go to what's big and beautiful and lovely. And then Russell says, there is no splendor. There is no vastness. There is only triviality for a moment and then nothing. Completely opposite ways to view the world. And so the chapter, I'm going to put my book down for a second just because I need to be able to operate without notes sometimes.
Use both hands, gesture.
I would say the thing that stuck with me from that chapter more than anything else, Chris, is if we more often than not occupy our times with things that are small, then everything becomes small.
Sure.
And if we really look around at our lives, we don't want everything to be small. We want something to be big.
Right. Yep.
But if we train ourselves via the internet to only think everything is passing and fleeting and laugh for a moment, then everything becomes small and nothing becomes enjoyable. And what we effectively do is something like, I'm going to watch this game that I've really wanted to watch, but I'm also going to be on Twitter at the same time, and I'm also going to text my friends, and I'm also going to be, and none of that is big.
Right.
And you end up going, that wasn't all that enjoyable because I tried to do all the things that I could possibly do at once, and everything became trivial, and I now have no joy.
Yep.
So can you reflect a little bit on the idea that if we occupy ourselves too frequently with the small things, then everything becomes small or meaningless?
So let me put that in the, we talk about the joy thing, right? We want to be joyful people. And Bertrand Russell was obviously not a joyful individual.
A little bit of a downer, as the kids say.
The kids say, yeah, exactly. And, when I think about what I enjoy most about small things, all right? Now, we had a sub together right now, okay? Now, that would be a small thing to somebody who's like, I need to eat some lunch today, okay? I enjoyed the sub more because I ate it with you. All right, now you can feel free to say "aw" or give me a hug or whatever you want. But here's the reality: the reason why it's enjoyed is because it's enjoyed in relationship. And if you start peeling the layers back on this whole, the novelty thing, the isolation thing, the consumption thing, what's different about a meal that you're eating with somebody else? Okay. Well, the novelty you're getting is not from the small thing you're consuming. The novelty you're getting is, I want to talk to this person, right? Like, I'm getting together for a meal with an individual. And I'm not just by myself, I'm with somebody, which makes the meal significant. And I'm not there simply to eat food, but I'm there to share a meal. And there's a big difference between eating food and sharing a meal. I think about this with sporting events, okay? And Piper has talked before where he talks about glory and majesty, and it's like, when you're at a sporting event and you feel like you're part of this big thing, right? Like you're beholding glory, basically. You're seeing these things happen out in front of you. And I can't remember 95% of the football games I've ever watched in terms of details and everything. But here's what I remember. I remember going to a Packers preseason game against the New England Patriots back in 1998 with my dad. I remember that. Why? Because I went with my dad.
Yeah.
And I was there with a bunch of other people, and I watched something much bigger than my TV screen. I remember going with...
and I'm sure you didn't just watch in the sense of, like, you saw in... I'm
tunnel
kind
vision,
of miming
right.
a little bit here with my hands around my eyes to say I just saw the football field.
Exactly.
Like, you felt the stadium.
Right.
You heard...
Exactly. And I'm with my dad, right? And, I think about back in, like, 2018, I think it was, where the aforementioned Stan Kelderman won these tickets, sideline passes, to go see a Packer game. And I'm at Lambeau Field, and I'm with him. And my fondest memories of the whole thing are I'm getting pictures with Stan on the field. And I'm there, okay? So what's different about this? And we think about the minutia of things. A football game can be a small thing, right? A football game can be a very small thing. You've got red zone. I mean, you can just play to play if somebody's in the red zone, about to score potentially. Like, okay, well, it becomes, trivial. But it's not trivial when you start putting it in the context of what humanity was made for, right? You're made for big things. You're made for glory. You're made for people. You're made by a relational God. You're not made to consume. You're made to use, right? And so you think about what is Adam's charge? It's to fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion. It's not go do stuff. There's purpose, there's meaning. It's in relationship. It's in community, and it's part of a much bigger picture of God's design.
Yeah, there's another sports analogy, because I'm watching the Tennessee Volunteers baseball team, which college baseball is growing in popularity, but I was thinking last night, if Tennessee wins the College World Series, I don't think I'm going to have a bunch of my friends texting me going, yo, Tennessee won the College World, in the same way if they won the basketball championship.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, it's funny because I'm kind of invested in this thing that no one else cares about, and what if I get a T-shirt? Are people going to care? So I'm thinking about those little things, and I'm watching this game, and they show some statistics about how in 2019, which I think was the first year of the head coach's tenure, they were averaging under 2,000 fans per game in attendance, something like 1,500 or 1,900. 2020, I think there was a dip, maybe down to 1,500 for COVID reasons, and then 21, 2, 3 up to present day, you're talking an increase to 3, 4, 5, almost 6,000 in attendance.
Okay.
So you're tripling the average attendance from 2019. Now, a large part of that is they're way better. They're more enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, it helps.
But I found myself thinking, in 2024, the college team is about to invest millions of dollars in a new stadium in an era where you can watch everything on your phone. Yeah. Why would they do that? And I thought, because we want something that gets us outside of ourselves.
Right.
Like, people are going to come to this not only because the team is good, but a live sporting event is one thing on offer to give myself something worthy of my attention in a world in which most of my time is just spent kind of like little things that none of them are really worthy of my attention, but they kind of have my attention, and they're kind of fun, and I get a little laugh, but I don't ever leave with anything. Like, if I read a book, I might leave with a quote that but if I watch these reels, I guess I leave maybe with, like, send it to my friend and then they ha-ha it.
Right.
And so we have this, I think, general feeling that a lot of what we give our attention to is not worth our time.
Yeah.
But there are these moments where we're like, I'm watching this game and it's fun that they won, but what I would remember most from that game last night is there's a senior pitcher named Xander Sechrist, and from my understanding is a guy that no one ever thought was going to be a viable starter.
Okay.
But in an era where players transfer willy-nilly, and
Yeah.
there's always a better opportunity if you're not getting playing time. This guy stayed at one school for 4 years, and he ends up starting in one of the biggest games in Tennessee history because he's been the most reliable guy on Sundays. And he dominant, best start of his, like the last time he's ever going to play at this location in front of his home fans, he has his best outing of his life. And he gets to walk off under a standing ovation. Like, that is a glory moment, right? That's a moment. I tell my wife when she's like, "Why do you want to watch that?" It's like, because there's stories here. There's this 21-year-old kid who fought his way to being a viable weekend starter when no one else thought he could, and he just won the series. There's this story. There's something worthy of my attention, worthy of celebrating. And what I think effectively is lost most of the time, Chris, is because of our phones, one of two things happens. Either we so fill our moments with triviality that nothing is meaningful, or effectively what happens is when we do finally catch a meaningful moment, we almost immediately trivialize it with our phone.
Sure. Yep.
And so that's probably the biggest takeaway I've had from this whole book is like, Josh, make sure that when you have a moment of joy, don't trivialize it.
Yeah.
Like, things are already so trivial, but I mean, if you leave church and you think, man, God's people came and we heard his word and we sang together and that was beautiful. Don't listen to a podcast on the way home.
Right.
Thank him. Take the 7-minute drive. Enjoy the stoplight for once in your life because it gives you a little bit more time in the car to praise the Lord for what he did. Or you have a good time with a friend and you end it by saying, I'm so glad to have spent that time. It's almost like there's these 3 parts to enjoying something. There's anticipation of the thing, which oftentimes can get cut by the phone. You know, if you're waiting for an event to start, if you're waiting for someone to get there, the anticipation can get cut by triviality. The thing itself can get cut by triviality, whether it's, you're in the middle of a conversation, you pull out your phone, you kind of trivialize the moment. But then also the follow-up can get trivialized, where instead of enjoying the man, that was a good meal. You're on your phone. And so that's a lot of what I've been thinking about, Chris, is this kind of tripartite, if you will, 3-part means of enjoying something, the before, the during, and the after. And for me in particular, I want to make sure that, man, when I catch a glimmer of joy, I don't want to ruin it. When I'm looking at my daughter and I'm thinking, wow, this is just fun to laugh with her. Don't ruin it.
Don't take the phone out, take a picture of it and put it on Instagram.
No, ride that wave.
Exactly.
Be there for that moment. And that's been something I've tried to do more. Any ways in which you are tempted personally to be occupied with the trivial or to trivialize big moments?
I would say out of all the things that we've talked about, I think it's probably one of the things I'm least likely to do at this point. In part because I'm naturally a sentimental person. Like, I'm naturally sentimental, and so if somebody cares enough to involve me with something, it is inherently meaningful to me. It means something to me. If somebody gives me a call, says, "Hey, I'd like to do something with you," whatever, the peek behind the curtain for those who are listening. Josh and I are pastors, but that's our profession and our vocation, but that's not who we are, right? We're human beings. We're men made in the image of God, and we have, relational desires and feelings, believe it or not. We have feelings and those types of things. And so, for me personally, what's meaningful is if somebody looks at me and sees, this isn't just Pastor Chris, this is Chris, and takes the time to invest in me as a human being, as a person, as a friend, that's meaningful to me. And it's meaningful in because these types of things, I grew up learning from my parents to value relationship and to value investment. My dad was a teacher, so summers were great for our family, not because we took vacations. We rarely took vacations. A few in my 18 years at home, as a child that we ever took, 3 that I can recall, beyond just, an in-state trip to Appleton or something like that. But I was taught to value that time, to just value it. My dad's home, all right, so I can do this, go golf with my dad. Just go do it, and it's a fun thing to do, remember it, and that's the thing that mattered to me. And so I guess I would say I advocate for this more than say I struggle with it at this point, because I do see, as somebody who's been off social media now for 6 years, probably, whatever it was, I'm looking more from an outside perspective at this point, where I can look and say, it's not helpful It's not helpful. And let's get beyond the idea of pride, okay? Like, I think that's unfortunately a canvas, the social media canvas pride paints on quite frequently, trying to like boast and one up other people and say, oh, look at this and look at my beautiful home or look at my child, that kind of a thing. It's just to say, like, can you appreciate this for what it is? Like, in this moment, can you just appreciate it? Don't take a picture. Don't talk to other people about it. See this for what it is right now as a gift that God has given to you. And is it okay for you to enjoy it if you never, ever, ever post it on social media? Can you actually look at this and say, I don't need other people to know this because right now I'm enjoying a good gift from God. And there is no obligation I have to tell other people now in any other way than like, maybe next time that you are tempted to go on and trivialize a moment of significance by just, like, well, I'm going to post something about it or whatever. Why don't next time you go on social media, how about you post that God gave you great joy by being able to enjoy something from him?
Yeah.
And that's it. And I'm not going to post a picture. I'm not going to, try to impress anybody. I'm just going to say, my good Father has given me a good gift, and it is enough for me to enjoy that. So.
Yeah, and maybe if you're tempted not even to just post it, but to send a picture to someone via text, and
Right.
that's the temptation. One thing that I've enjoyed recently is if there's something funny, like an interaction with my kid, or I think about someone in church, and I want to text them because immediacy is like everything is now.
Yep.
So that's, it's like I have a thought. I want to text Chris. I want Chris
Yep.
to know this funny thing. I'll try to withhold that and wait till I see Chris in person.
Sure.
Because part of the joy of sharing a funny thing is seeing the other person's face. And so there's an increased joy when I wait. About
Yes.
waiting to tell Chris this joke or this interaction until I see him, because I'm going to share it with him in the flesh.
Yep.
Right. So that's a little small practical tip is when you're waiting to share something with someone else, even though the phone beckons, you can do it now.
Right.
Which, by the way, usually rips you from the presence of another person.
Right.
Fight against that. Stay in the presence of the person you're
Yeah.
with, and then wait. And should the Lord bring it to mind the next time you see the person you wanted to share it with,
Yeah.
enjoy that moment, right? And see their face. So there's a small thing, because James brings up what you said about the picture taking. And if my wife is listening to this, I know she's not because she doesn't, but she thinks I'm a curmudgeon in this way, but I'm fine with it. He says, we remember a time when we could enjoy good things without having to photograph or broadcast them. We remember somehow what it felt like to lose ourselves in something outside of us, to have our attention drawn to something that was really happening. The joy that comes from genuine self-forgetfulness.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is we want to be drawn outside of ourselves to something that we're just like, wow, I got to experience that. But the phone typically draws us back to ourselves.
Well, let's just think, Josh, even tracing for a second the difference in how photography is even operated. 25 years ago, if you go on a family vacation, take a trip, let's say you go to the Grand Canyon, you're going to take a picture of the Grand Canyon, right? Take a picture of the Grand Canyon. Or you might ask a stranger to come, and you and your family are going to get together, and you're going to, hug each other, you're going to huddle, and say, would you please take a picture of my family here, right? What's the most common form of picture now that people take?
Selfie.
The selfie. And so we have gone from being a culture in which we enjoy things for being what they are on a big picture level to saying, I want to insert myself into every big thing.
Yeah.
Every glorious thing. I need to make sure that I am at the center of it, And so you're at the Grand Canyon. What's obscuring the picture of the Grand Canyon? Your mug. It's let me take this picture of.
Well, when you put it like that, Chris.
It is, you have this space of a picture, and you take a picture of yourself. And hey, it's great if, you want to show people at Grand Canyon. But is it enough for you to tell somebody, I was at the Grand Canyon because I took a picture of it, and you don't need to see me there? It's enough to say, I saw it and it was beautiful, and I want you to see the beauty of the Grand Canyon. Instead, we've decided, I want you to see my beauty at the Grand Canyon. I want you to look at my face at the Grand Canyon. And the most significant thing you're going to notice about this picture is not the glory of this massive chasm that the Lord, when he flooded the earth, it carved out all of these things. It's, look at my face. Look at my face. Because how many takes do you take? Like, you take a picture of the Grand Canyon, and it's one take typically. One take, two takes, and you want different angles. When you take a selfie, 20 times. And why is it 20 times? It's because I
Because
want to
the
look
Grand
the
Canyon
best.
Grand Canyon doesn't have a double chin.
Right, exactly. So I want to eliminate all the glaring faults. I want to look the best as I possibly can. And so is it just enough for you, Christian, to say, God made me for something more than myself? And I think this is where, as we think through things, as we think about this stuff, like, don't fall victim to the same things that, and it's whether it's a pornography thing, whether it's a selfie upset, like, take your pick of the different things that come at you as temptation from the internet, but you need to see it as that. Like, you need to see it as, this is not simply, and the whole message of this book and this digital liturgies thing has been, this is not a morally neutral environment. Mm-hmm. It has an agenda, and it's seeking to do something to change you. And let's push back against that and see, like, how have we changed? What has happened? How has the presence of a phone in my hand that can take pictures altered my willingness to take 25 pictures from different angles of the largest hole in the earth to 40 pictures of myself in front of this hole,
Yeah, and there's another temptation that maybe is less self-serving but still present, which is, for me to fully enjoy this, I need proof of it.
Right.
I need to be able to look back at it on my phone. And there's a couple things there, which is, one, the picture is almost never as good as the site that you have in front of you.
Sure.
So just think about that. I mean, if you're looking at a person, like, let's say you're on a first date, you're enjoying the risk and beauty of a first date, and there's an energy there, and the picture's not going to be as good as what you're looking at.
Yep.
The picture of the Grand Canyon is not as good. The picture of a sunset is just woefully disappointing every time, because the sunset is so vast and panoramic, and you just can't get a picture that does it. I think the only thing I've ever heard that looks better in a picture is the Northern Lights, apparently.
Okay.
If you took a picture, you could see more vivid color.
Sure.
But leave the extreme example, the abnormal example. Almost everything else in life, the depth is just not there. The clarity is what your eye can see is so much better than the most amazing modern camera. So just think about that. If your goal is, I want to photograph this so I can remember it, would you be better served? I'm going to maybe go stronger and say you will be better served to linger for 7 seconds and drink it in.
Yeah.
You'll be more joyful and you'll remember it better, because the picture just almost never does it service at all. Well, in this talk about death by minutia, with just a couple thoughts from a page that I think I've read before our prayer ministry at least twice now. It's a really good page because James talks about dislocation and distraction and discontentment as being kind of hallmarks of death by minutia. Yeah. These little trivial things, they draw us always away from where we are. So I'm tempted right now to not be in the room with Chris. Right?
Well, most people are, Josh.
So I'm tempted to be dislocated. I'm tempted to be distracted. I'm never really giving my attention fully to a good book, fully to a good meal, fully to a good relationship, fully to the Lord through His Word. Yeah. I'm distracted everywhere, and I'm discontent. There's always something better, always something new. We ate at Jersey Mike's, but there is Jimmy John's, and there's also Subway, and there's also, I could always have something different. Yep. And James says, hey, prayer fixes all of these things. So here's your pub for prayer. We both have prayer ministries every Thursday night in Wausau and Stevens Point. He says, in prayer, distraction gives way to attentiveness. Instead of letting the fog of 1,000 curiosities or boredoms or worries drive us into therapeutic digital overload, we say, I need peace, I need it from Jesus, and we go to Him. God does not want our attention spread butter thin. He revealed Himself to us in Jesus precisely so we would know Him, so that our restless search for meaning and identity and forgiveness would end in His presence. So in prayer, distraction gives way to attentiveness. I find myself, Chris, never more clear-minded and focused than about halfway through our prayer meeting on Thursdays. In prayer, discontentment gives way to assurance. Because of the gospel, we know that the peace for our anxieties does not depend finally on us. There's no influence or status we must reach before the King of the universe will consider us worthy of His peace. Paul can assure the Philippians that the peace of God will come into them as they pray, because it's a peace won for them by the one who made peace by His blood. When our digital habitats make our lives look small, Christ can make our destiny look glorious. Finally, in prayer, dislocation gives way to presence. The Bible's promise that as we make our requests known to God, His peace will not only become available, but will guard our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Whenever we find ourselves in God's providence, we can know that His peace is guarding us in Christ Jesus because we ourselves are in Christ Jesus. We do not have to constantly pine for the world on the other side of our screen. We don't have to be divided in two between attention and presence. Wherever we are in Christ Jesus, and so we can be all there.
Yeah.
So, after all of the discussion of liturgy, we just want to come back and say, let's re-liturgize ourselves through worship and prayer to say, distraction, discontentment, dislocation, God actually has given us something to fix those ills. It's prayer.
Yeah.
And in prayer, we find a joyfulness, a peace, a rest that we don't find in other places in our lives.
And corporate prayer is wonderful.
Yeah. So Thursday nights, both locations, you can come pray with us and be located, be not distracted, be attracted.
Be attractive.
Really just landing a plane here. You can be present, you can give your attention, and you can be contented. So we hope that this has been a helpful discussion. There's certainly more to talk about. We hope if you have any more abiding questions, if you have any digital practices that have been helpful, you can share those or share those with others.
What's on the agenda, Josh, for our next series?
Maybe not immediately, but certainly soon we're going to talk about the canon.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's next week or if it's next month, but we're going to.
So you're talking about like firepower?
Yeah.
Ammunition?
Yeah, we're going to shoot off cannons. We're going to talk about the biblical canon. So as we live in a culture that often says things like, that's your interpretation, we want to be able to establish confidently that we actually have the words that claim to be from the Lord.
Yeah.
Okay, so step one is, step one is, does the Bible claim that the Lord spoke, and do we have reliably the words from the Bible? If so, then we have to evaluate the claim that the Lord spoke. But what we shouldn't do is kind of cave to cultural pressures when someone says, well, that's just your interpretation.
Yeah.
If actually we do reliably have the words we should have, and those words say God spoke, and we agree that he did, then interpretation is simply, let's open and read it, right? And so what we want to do is a series probably called something like This Old Book, or Can We Trust This Old Book? And really kind of confront head on a tendency in our culture to look at the Bible as ancient, man-made, written in error, and instead say, no, we have a collection of historically verifiable, safeguarded documents claiming to be God's words. And we can date them. There's veracity to them, and so we should engage with them as such.
I hope you're looking forward to that, everybody. If you have any questions about anything you'd like to ask us specifically, it might be helpful to you, please let me or Pastor Josh know. We'll be happy to field those inquiries and comments.
Until then, this has been a time to think. It's been so long, it might be titled An Age to Think, an aeon.
An epoch.
An epoch to think, or just a time to think.